WNST tasked with 2 home games sandwiched in 6 days after the victory over the Houston Texans. The Ravens will be taking on the Detroit Lions at 1 o'clock on Sunday. And I don't know what the Orioles are doing this week, but this guy will be there to cover it as well as the Nationals and anything happening regionally here for all things baseball. He is a senior writer at ESPN.com. We always love having Eddie Matz stop by here and talk little seams with us. He is ESPN Eddie Matz out on Twitter and has a lovely purple sunset picture over Camden Yards on the front of his Twitter. Eddie, happy off season to you, pal. How you been?
Doing well, thanks. I'd like to talk seams, but my clothes all have holes in them. All the seams are ripping because I'm gaining so much weight from Thanksgiving, so I'm not sure we should talk seams.
Well, you're not traveling around watching baseball 8 nights a week as you have been known to do from April through October. This offseason's fascinating, right? From an Orioles perspective, if you are a hardcore offseason hot stove fan about who's going where and why, the Orioles probably aren't going to be very active in certain ways this offseason, maybe not as much as I would like them to be. And this is always, part of the Mr. Angelo strategy. But this whole notion of where Dan Duquette's going to be, where Buck Showalter's going to be, let alone Machado, Jones, Britton, and Brock, these next 60 days are going to shape this franchise in many ways for the years moving forward.
Yeah, but, let's not kid ourselves. I don't think there's anything based on past behavior patterns. I don't think there's anything that's going to happen that's going to change, shock us or change that shape in any impactful way. I think if they're willing to unload some of those guys whose contracts are coming up soon, whether it's Machado or any of those guys, then we're talking about something newsworthy, something that could really, have major implications going forward. But I haven't seen anything in the past that's going to lead me to believe that in the future that's going to happen.
Well, so what will happen? I guess that's the part of being predictive here. I know what didn't happen here the last 5 years. The Red Sox and the Yankees weren't as competitive as they had been for the first generation. I think it's pretty clear to anyone that watches baseball, they're back, and they're back in a real way. And when we're talking about Manny Machado being dangled more than that, you're probably going to have to go and compete with him beginning next year. And then where's the compensation? So all of these sort of smart baseball things that lead the Houston Astros to the promised land and the Kansas City Royals to the promised land. This is that time of the year where those decisions have to be made and made well, and there has to be some sort of long-range strategy, and I don't know that that's even possible with Duquette and Showalter dangling at this point.
Yeah, to me, the only move that's likely to be made, if anything is going to happen, is Britton getting traded, right? Because it seemed like it almost happened at the trade deadline, and so sure, that could happen this offseason. I feel like there's still teams that would be interested in him. The problem there is that his value is nowhere near what it would have been a year ago, right, for sure. That was when it was at its highest. And then even at the trade deadline, his value had already dipped because of he hadn't been healthy, hadn't been performing, and now he's only got 1 year left on the contract. So even if they trade him, it's not like that's going to be, Machado is one thing. If they traded Machado, I feel that's the haul that they would get for him would dwarf the haul at this point, I think, that they would get for Britton. I'm not saying they shouldn't trade Britton because they certainly have plenty of other weapons in the bullpen that could step up and do that. So to me, Britton's the most likely guy to get moved. Maybe Brock, one or the other, not both, right? Because if they trade one, they need the other.
But you might not like what you get back for Britton, right? And I don't, in the case of Duquette, I always have to say, well, if he's not going to be here next year, why is he making the decisions that are going to impact this team on 2020 and 2021 and 2022?
Yeah,
it is a really weird time, I think, in this organization.
It is, but that's not just the Orioles in MLB, and that's not just MLB, right? And any city, any team, pick a pro sports franchise when the decision maker has a certain amount of time left on the contract. That doesn't mean they stop making decisions, right? You haven't, whether Duquette stays or goes, but let's say he goes, somebody replaces him. Whoever that person is that replaces him is not here yet, so it's kind of lame duck no matter how you slice it. So you just kind of take it on good faith and trust that he's going to do what is best for the franchise in the hope that his, whatever legacy he leaves is enough to motivate him to do right by the franchise.
Well, and then there's the whole part of those guys being sort of lame duck last year that I wouldn't be all that motivated to deal off Manny Machado or Zach Britton if I were Showalter and Duquette and only had 9 months left in my administration. I would say play on with those guys. I don't want to deal those guys. I want to go try to win. And there is this sort of mindset airing out of the talking head side of the organization, not the Angelo side, that says we're going all in next year. You know, we're going to go get some pitching here this offseason, and we're going to go try to win 94 games and be a part of this thing next year. I don't know if that's realistic or not, but I'll believe that when I see, like, pitchers. When you and I are talking in spring training in March about 4 legitimate Major League Baseball pitchers, right now they have 2 sort of kind of maybe in Bundy and Gausman. I'll give you Bundy. I'm not even sure about Gausman not slipping down the wrong side. So, I don't know who's going to get guys out, and I sat here like you did all year and watched starter after starter take the ball start after start with ERAs of +6, and I'm wondering whether I'm living in the twilight zone or not, because I've never seen that from a Major League Baseball team, and certainly not from the Orioles.
Yeah, it was ugly. And it's not going to change. Their fortunes aren't going to change unless, like you said, they get a couple guys to fill 3 and 4. Or, I mean, if Orioles fans really want to wish, some guys to fill 1 and 2 or 2 and 3 and, bump one of those guys back to where they probably would be on any other Major League roster. But, yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, sure, they pick up a couple of semi-blue chip guys, and that makes them competitive, makes them able to go all in, makes them able to win in the low 90s. But again, there's nothing about the past history under Duquette indicates that that's going to happen. Even if they said, all right, we're willing to spend a little money on a Lance Lynn or an Alex Cobb or whoever it is, there's still the other part of that equation, which is those guys have to want to come work at Camden Yards. And to me, I've never had a pitcher necessarily tell me this to my face, but to me, part of the problem with the Orioles getting pitchers is that they just don't want to come pitch there. And why would they? Right? Like, it does not look good for their numbers, doesn't look good on the resume, doesn't look good for their future earning potential. So it's a tricky problem.
He is Eddie Matz. You can follow him out at ESPN and ESPN Eddie Matz. So where's the Machado thing as you see it right now? Crystal ball that out for me. Do you think they really would deal him if they're not? They have never been a dealer of star players. They've never been good at this part of the building thing, other than McPhail, and picking up Jones and Tillman and Chris Davis. This has been really kind of where they've failed in the past, and where other successful small market. I know they like to call themselves a small market, even though Masson has made them a far larger market than that. But this is where teams build through organizations by fleecing other teams. I mean, we saw the White Sox try to do that on the Chris Sale deal last year with Moncada, right?
Right. So are you talking about Machado, like...
What's the end game? Is the end game he goes out the side door after an 83-win team, 83-win season this year, and goes and signs with the Yankees or the Red Sox or wherever it's going to be? But he won't be an Oriole this time next year, right?
No, probably not. I mean, you never know, right? They could, in theory. Like, I don't think they're not going to trade him this offseason, from as best I can tell. Even if they're just, rotting in the cellar come late July, I don't think you trade him then. Not that they wouldn't mind trading him then. Even the Orioles, I think, if they were 25 games out of first, would think about it. The problem is that there's really no market at that point for a guy like him. Usually the offensive guys that change hands that time of year are older guys. Like a guy like Machado, a team would have to pay too much to get him for 2 months, and I don't think they'd be willing to do that unless they knew that they had the inside track on re-signing him. So it would almost be like an advanced look at the guy that they're going to sign in the offseason, but there's no guarantee of that. But yeah, I think the most likely scenario is he walks after this year, unless they can sign him in the offseason. And, look, anything can happen, right? If the Orioles were willing to plunk down $161 million on Chris Davis, you would have to think that they'd be interested in plunking down some serious money on Machado. He's not a pitcher, right? So we know that the Orioles don't like to spend on pitching. He's a hitter and he hits home runs, and we know that Angelos likes those things. So it's not completely out of the question that they could put enough money on the table to re-sign Machado. What we don't know is how much money other teams are going to put on the table. I can't imagine it's going to be enough to keep him from going elsewhere. Fascinating,
Eddie, how expectations are and how they change sort of market to market and year to year. The Red Sox, The Nationals, the Yankees, all fire managers at the end of seasons that anyone would say that's what you're aiming for, to have that kind of a season. It's been a little bit of a wild, wild west, and I think also, and I know you spent a lot of time covering the Nationals, there's a real battle going on between old and new and analytic and not analytic and scout-based versus analysis in the game of baseball. There is a war internally, and the stat nerds are always going to win this thing, right? I mean, that the game is going that direction, and the people that are managing by feel and scouting are being sort of phased out, and they're looking at the analytics and justifying it through that, right?
Yeah, it's just the natural evolution of the game. I mean, look, you talk about the Nationals, take Dave Martinez, for example. I don't know yet how analytically minded he is. I think that was part of the sell and part of his introductory press conference. He sort of talked about that, and obviously he worked under Joe Madden for the last 10 years, and Madden embraces that managing as much as any manager probably in the game. But I still feel like all the analytical stuff happens sort of above the managerial level. You have guys who embrace it, guys who don't. But to me, that shift is happening more in the general manager's office. When it comes to signings and things like that, I feel like on a day-to-day basis, game to game, at bat to at bat, that stuff seeps its way in there a little bit, but for me, that's mostly in the front office. But yeah, it's clearly guys like Dusty Baker, who started out in a different generation before analytics even were a thing. Guys like that, it's going to be hard, especially someone who is has had such a long career and hasn't quite yet had success at the highest level in the World Series. It's tough for guys like that.
This kid Ohtani's coming over, right? And anytime we see players come from the Pacific side of things, there's always some upheaval for all this and some bidding for all this. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it hasn't. But he really is he's the Machado or the Bryce Harper of that side of the world at this point, right? And over the next couple of days and weeks, we're going to see the Wild Wild West begin and the bidding for him, right?
Yeah, the Orioles will probably get him, right? Probably
always a sense of humor you have, Eddie Matz. That's why I love having you on.
How crazy would that be if that actually happened, right? Like, yeah, I mean, look, I feel like the guys who come over from Asia, I feel like this guy can't possibly live up to the hype. It'd be impossible. Then that's not a knock on his talent level. I haven't seen the guy play. It's just an indictment on the amount of hype. Like, we love hype over here, right? We're looking for news stories. It's the off season. It's the hot stove, and so it's Stanton and it's Ohtani, right? So he just can't possibly live up to the hype. And you look at a guy like, I'm not going to say it's not fair to compare Hyun-Soo Kim to this guy, but you look at Hyun-Soo Kim's numbers over in the Korean League, they're ridiculous. I mean, ridiculous, And obviously the Japanese League is a higher level than the Korean League. You look at a guy like Ichiro, obviously his talent's translated. I'm not going to say Ohtani's not going to be a good player, but, I think everyone has this fantasy that, yeah, he's going to be the next Babe Ruth and he's going to win 20 games and hit 330 home runs all in the same year. It'd be fantastic for the game. It would be a spectacle, but I mean, let's not get carried away here. He's got to get here first, and then we'll see what happens.
Pretty good season, wasn't it, Eddie? I know we haven't talked since probably since September, early pennant race, since football season got going. The Astros, the run, the postseason, the games, the drama, new stars, new likable stars, old hats like the Yankees and the Red Sox and the Dodgers you can hate on if you hate those franchises. I thought it really, it was, as much as we beef and bitch about the NFL and seeing empty seats and all the infighting going on there and the CTE and the knee and all that stuff, baseball's had a little bit more of an easier run here, and I think what's going on the field, if you just like baseball, other than the home run strikeout thing, which I'm struggling with as a get off my lawn old guy, I don't think that's good baseball. I'd rather see more stolen bases and hit and run and all those things that analytics don't like so much. But that being said, when it came down to the games in October, when the games were supposed to shine, it was a pretty good season for baseball, I think.
Oh man, it was fascinating. It's as good as any one I can remember. I think we might have liked some pennant races, more pennant races coming down the stretch, right? Like there wasn't much suspense over that, but once we got into the postseason, it was great. And even in the regular season, even though there weren't some pennant races, you had Stanton doing his thing, so that was kind of like a race of its own. And I'm with you. I'm right from the get off my lawn camp too, and I would rather see baseball be played than just this all or nothing thing. But it seems to have captivated most of the country, right? They had no problem with it. So that was interesting. And then the Astros to do what they did, especially coming off the Hurricane Harvey stuff. I mean, that was just a fantastic story, right? The Dodgers getting back the World Series for the first time in a long time. Judge doing his thing with the Yankees, the Cubs getting back there. It really was a pleasure to watch. Usually when the season's over for me, I was done when the Nationals were done as far as going to the park and covering a thing, and I'm thrilled to get back to a more sort of normal life and get back to my family. And I kind of at some point I sort of turn it off and block it out. But it was kind of hard to block this out because there was some really compelling stuff going on.
Eddie Matz is ESPN. Eddie Matz out on Twitter and, of course, at ESPN. This portion of our WNST programming brought to you by our friends at DNL Window Tinting. 26 years of tinting everything. Cars, boats, businesses. They put the shades on the sun. They take away the squint. They're in Parkville and in White Marsh. And, of course, our friends at Costas Inn. Good enough for the Today Show and my mom. The fat crabs, big crab cakes, pit beef all afternoon. The legend continues in Dundalk on North Point Boulevard. We'll see you down at Costas Inn. They also ship those crab cakes for the holidays as well. Eddie, for the National League and I guess for the Dodgers and the imbalance that's going on over there, and then this Atlanta Braves thing comes out last week where I guess the poor sort of get poorer at some point. The Astros Cardinals thing, the Braves thing. Boy, there's a lot of chicanery going on in baseball, and as much as in the NFL, Goodell's trying to play heavy-handed, they came down heavy on the Braves, and I think it is a deterrent, in a sport where we have Deflategate worries and crooked referees and gambling and betting and all that stuff. You can't have hokey pokey going on at the Caribbean level where it's almost like college basketball, which is under FBI investigation right now. I mean, there's just a lot of crooked going on, and baseball sort of putting a very, very lead foot down on that last week, right?
Yeah, it was huge. It's going to be crippling for them. I mean, crippling. Like the amount of prospects that they're losing over that, it basically is going to deplete their farm system and take them from being one of the best, if not the best farm system in the game to essentially the Orioles. Right? Like, it's just,
very kind of you. Happy holidays to you, Eddie.
Yeah. That's probably not fair to the Orioles. They're getting there. The Orioles. They've got some guys now, but it's interesting because when the allegations first came out that there was some stuff going on with the international signings, they weren't really. You didn't know exactly what was going on and what you didn't have specifics on it. And then even when they doled out the punishment, you still didn't quite know exactly what was going on. Then you heard about it. What's interesting is that they've chosen to make the Braves the guinea pig here, right? Because I don't know for sure, but based on, I did a story in Brazil last year, and I was kind of immersed in that world for a while, and I talked to a lot of scouts who do this kind of international, they're evaluating these guys, and there's a lot of sort of gray area out there. And I can't imagine that the Braves are the only team that's been doing this stuff, right? So you have to wonder, why now? Why them? Why are they making an example of them? And I think you're right. It's definitely going to be a deterrent because no team wants to get set back like the Braves just got set back. But it's interesting that it was. I feel like there's got to be more to that story, and I'm just spitballing here, but it seems conspicuous because I feel like there's plenty of other teams that do this kind of stuff. And if you're the Nationals, it's like you look at that division. You've got the Mets, who were in a world of hurt coming off of last year. The Phillies were supposed to sort of be on their way, but it didn't really happen. Now they've changed managers. The Marlins are in a complete state of like change and turnover. The Braves were like the one team who was supposed to be on the up and up, and now they're completely just exploded. Right? I mean, they still have obviously their guys at the big league level, but for the future, really, if you're a Nationals person inside that organization, you got to be sitting there being like, man, we're living good here. Like where's the competition?
Well, and you mentioned all the cheating going on. I always love to share that photo. This stadium is off limits to scouts from Baltimore in the Korean Baseball League because I would think in other cultures the scouting is a little bit college basketball before the Wild Wild West was won, right?
Yeah. Again, I don't know for sure, but yeah, I think there's definitely. It's harder to keep an eye on those kinds of things. When I was doing this story on Eric Pardinho, who's this like basically Brazil's $1 million arm, I was talking to guys who, they're people, so executives, teams are not allowed to have verbal agreements with players prior to the international signing day, like when those international free agents are allowed to sign at the beginning of July. But like common sense tells you, they kind of have to be talking to these guys. Otherwise, when it comes time for that signing day to come, like they wouldn't have their ducks in a row, right? So they have to be talking to these guys. So, it's kind of like this dirty little secret that like teams do talk to guys, and there are these sort of verbal discussions about like, all right, we're
the NFL, by the way, has instituted a tampering period now.
Right.
They literally call it the tampering period, which is okay, fair enough. I mean, you got 48 hours to tamper. Go for it, right?
Right. But I talked to, during the course of reporting that story, I talked to executives who were like worried that I was doing the story and like, what was going to come out, and you got to be careful with how you phrase things, and there's all this like gray area there. And I think obviously what baseball is trying to do is make it less gray and make it codified. And it's good. They should, right? There should be rules, especially, I think back, 10, 20 years ago when there weren't as many international players coming in, but now there's such an influx of international players from Latin America, South America, Asia, that it's becoming such a significant part of the game that it has to be codified. It has to be more black and white.
Dude, always a pleasure. I know we're not in baseball season. We're hot stoving it here. I know you're enjoying the family and some downtime before spring training. Always great to visit with you and talk baseball with you. Thanks for coming on, Eddie.
All right, Nestor. Take care.
You got it. ESPN Eddie Matz, the way to find him out on Twitter, as well as at the worldwide leader at ESPN.com. You can find me out in the BuyAToyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.